All right. Well, welcome to week 5. Looks like we're going to get back on track here. This week's chapter is about pretty much pre-sentencing investigations, the PSI, and sentencing guidelines for judges. I'll hit on pre-sentencing investigations first. Uh, a very common practice now. In fact, most of your probation officers are performing these in almost every court across America. Pages 127 and 128 outline just a ton of stuff that is listed in the PSI. But primarily, I mean, the things that probation officers are going to be looking at for the PSI is family history. Is this person that has a history of abuse? Is this person someone that grew up in a violent home? Are they not? Is this normal for them? Was this expected for them? They're going to look at their work history. Is this somebody who's functioning as a productive member of our society? Do they have a stable job history? When they get out, will they be? If they go to prison, when they get out, will they be able to have a job, successfully hold a job? Criminal activity will come into play. They'll look at all their previous criminal histories. They'll run a CCH on them, a national criminal history check through NCIC, the National Crime Information Center, and they'll see what their criminal convictions are. Is this a trend? Are they learning? Is this the first time they've committed an act, a criminal act? And then one of probably the most, not the most, probably the most important thing I believe in a PSI is the victim impact statement. How did this affect the victim? What negative effects or how does this affect the victim, and what has this done to their life? Because that's got to be considered. So the PSI report, an important report, something that most judges are asking their probation officers to do, and it keeps your probation officers pretty busy. I guess it just depends on your pride in your work, how thorough a PSI you do, but I would say it's a pretty important piece of a probation officer's job. Then we get into some sentencing issues. The first thing I want to talk about is the U.S. sentencing guidelines that were implemented in 1987. Those were guidelines, not requirements. And what we saw out of these, what we saw out of this, were judges trying to follow these guidelines. And in fact, we actually saw a reduction in probation from about 60% of convicted criminals going on probation with U.S. Courts down to 15%. Now, that's not your local jurisdiction; that's federal cases. So that primarily affected those federal cases, and so we saw this dramatic decrease. And you got to ask yourself why. Well, the reason is you got to look at the era that you were in the 1980s, late 1980s. Conservative movement of criminal justice was on the rise. They wanted to see punishment for the crime. Period. That's what they wanted, and that's what they got. Right or wrong, it dramatically reduced the probation, at least the probation portion of sentencing. The Sentencing Reform Act that came into play. Well, you got to remember when you're reading that section. I want you to remember the reasons that that act was implemented. What was the background behind that? Why were they trying to reform sentencing? And they throw in, for the community, to provide the offender with training rather than prison, to provide a more fair and just sentencing structure. So they throw in a bunch of reasons in there. I'd be interested to see what your thoughts are on that. If those were the true reasons, or is that just fluff that they use to push through this act? Then we go into different types of sentencing. You have determinate sentencing, um, which is a pretty well set form of sentencing. Here's the amount of time. I'm going to give you 2 years. However, with this determinate sentencing, you're guaranteed good time work off. So you can qualify. You're going into prison saying, I got 8 years. However, I know I can work off 2 of those years with good time by not getting in trouble throughout the week. And getting good time reports once a month, or how the system sets it up for that jurisdiction. Um, Indeterminate sentencing is pretty much a standard that we've primarily seen in the United States. Kind of sets that high mark and that low mark. Where you hear 10 to 15 years. And a range of dates. So it's not unlike determinate sentencing where you're saying, okay, you're going in for 10 years. You can work your way down a little bit, but the only way to get time off is through good time. Indeterminate sentencing, we get that leniency, 10 to 15. Um, we have mandatory sentencing, which I think the best example for that would be most states have gun charge requirements. If you get arrested for burglary, it's going to be 2 years to 6 years. But if you have a gun, you get an automatic 5 years tacked on top of that. So that's where we see the mandatory sentencing. Then you kind of get into the roles of a probation officer and kind of what they do. They prepare the reports. They classify offenders if the system is still in a system where they're classifying offenders. The probation officer may do that. They recommend sentences. And a lot of people think, well, that's just the role of the judge. The judge hands down the sentence, but that doesn't prevent the probation officer from including in their report their sentence recommendation. And they also determine what kind of supervisory program that person should be on. And rightfully so, as a probation department, they understand, they have experience with it, they know what programs work, and so they're going to make a recommendation. The last thing I'll talk about, something I maybe disagree with the book on a little bit, is their feelings of confidentiality of the PSI. I don't think the PSI is very confidential. I think many jurisdictions no longer keep that confidential. A judge can absolutely seal the PSI. He has the right to do that legally, but I think he'd be hard-pressed to do it. I think Freedom of Information Act will prevent that. I don't know why the PSI would be a confidential report. Our governmental agents, being the probation officers, are using governmental money, the tax dollars that pay them, to go out and generate a governmental report. So in my neck of the woods, I'd find it hard-pressed for them to refuse to turn over a PSI. So while the book talks about confidentiality of PSI, I think that with the Freedom of Information Act and the state of Ohio, we call it sunshine laws and things like that, coming into play, I think that we're going to see a lot more of those become less acceptable. So with that said, that's in the video. It's going to be a short one this week. You just get one. Enjoy your week. Enjoy your quiz. It won't be too bad. It's only 5 questions this week, 2 points each. So, and I will see you soon. Have a good day.